Welcome to the Mysterious Casebook. Tonight, we step beside Sherlock Holmes in the rope, left on the altar rail. A silent chapel. A rope coiled like a question. And one act of faith turned into murder. Now pour yourself something warm and let the mystery begin. The knock was not assertive, not demanding, but it possessed a certain regularity of 4 taps in slow succession, like a priest's hand on a chapel door. Holmes raised an eyebrow as I looked up from the Times. He had been standing by the window, unmoving for some time, the early fog brushing the glass with a soft breath. He did not turn when he spoke. "You may open it, Watson. I expect it is for me." I complied, expecting an urchin, a telegram boy, or some hastily scrawled parcel. But what entered was neither child nor courier. A man in his late 60s, robes flapping slightly about his boots, stepped into the room with the indecisive gait of one unaccustomed to leaving sacred ground. He held his hat pressed against his chest like a man who had carried last rites up too many stairs. "I am Reverend Thomas Asbury," he murmured, "from Lichmere Parish." Holmes nodded, gesturing toward the chair closest to the hearth. The coals had long cooled, but the Reverend lowered himself into it as though in preparation for confession. "The trouble began this morning, Mr. Holmes, and I pray it ends with me." Holmes finally turned. That would be most convenient for everyone involved. "What happened this morning?" The Reverend's lips pressed together. "When I unlocked the church to prepare for morning prayers, I found on the altar railer length of rope. A loop, carefully coiled, tied in what I believe was a hangman's noose. Holmes's stillness became motion. How thick? Excuse me? The rope. Hemp or twine? Dockline or curtain tie? About as thick as my thumb, said the vicar after a pause. Rather coarse, yellowed. And no message? That is the message, the man said quietly. Holmes moved across the room without sound, the soft creak of his heel against the floorboard the only interruption. "You've received no threats? Nothing direct?" "Only an unsigned note 3 days ago. It simply read, 'He will return to finish the vow.'" "Watson," Holmes said without turning, "kindly fetch my violin case. We are going to Lichmere." The tone in Holmes's voice reminded me of our Dartmoor visit, the sense that beneath every word was an echo waiting to repeat itself. Asbury rose, visibly startled. "You'll come? At once?" Holmes reached for his coat. "Do you lock the church at night?" "Yes. There is only one set of keys, mine, no caretaker. I retired last year. I sweep and lock it myself." "And who besides you would have reason to be in the church after hours?" The Reverend hesitated. "Only the organist, Mr. Felix Hartnell, but he departed 2 weeks ago without notice." Holmes's brow furrowed. "I've known 3 organists with excellent hands and dreadful judgment. We shall visit your parish today, sir." At that moment, a low, brittle chime rang from the street, the sound of a milk cart's bell, hollow and drawn, brushing across the morning. Holmes tilted his head as though committing it to memory. "Did you bring the note?" Asbury fumbled in his coat and produced a folded paper. Holmes read it with surgical detachment, eyes darting once left, once right, then holding in the centre. Interesting stroke. The word vow was written more deeply than the others, as though engraved. "Do you believe it is a threat?" "No," said Holmes, "I believe it's a reminder. The journey to Lichmere took nearly 2 hours. The village slouched against a grey slope north of Surrey, its roofs heavy with moss, its stone cottages crowded around the ancient chapel like disciples unwilling to leave. Asbury led us through a narrow gate into the churchyard. The chapel was smaller than I expected, narrow nave, pointed arches, stone walls, soothed by the passage of centuries. Inside it was colder than outside. The noose was gone. Holmes turned to Asbury without accusation. The Reverend raised both hands. "I left it. I swear I did. It was there when I went to fetch you. You did not take it with you?" "No. Well, perhaps I should have, but I feared it was sacrilege to touch it. I left it exactly where I found it, on the rail near the pulpit." Holmes crossed the aisle, knelt, and stared at the faint dust pattern upon the wood. "Here, you see this?" There was a mark. The rope had rested here long enough to leave a clean outline. Someone returned and removed it. Recently. He stood and turned. "The doors were locked behind you. The rear one has been bolted since Easter. Only the front, through which we entered. You were the only one with keys." "Yes." Holmes's face darkened. "Then either someone duplicated your key or they never needed one at all." Asbury sank into a pew, his face pale. "Would you trust Mr. Hartnell with your key?" "No, he was kind enough, but rather, I hesitate to speak ill. Do you think he is unstable?" "No, rather the opposite. He was too precise, always on time, always exact in ritual, but distant. And once I entered the vestry to find him staring at the altar, whispering, what did he say? Only one thing, the vow is not done." Holmes tapped a finger against the pew's edge, then moved to the organ. He opened the cover, pressed 3 keys. A low chord trembled into the air like breath escaping from something long sealed. As the note faded, Holmes murmured, "Someone is repeating a ritual, something unfinished, something sacred to him." From the vestry window a soft wind disturbed the ivy and made the latch tremble. "And if he returns again tonight?" I asked. Holmes turned. "Then we shall be waiting." The Reverend's hand had gripped the edge of the pew as Holmes spoke, his knuckles whitening with quiet dread. He looked from Holmes to me as though seeking confirmation that this was, indeed, the proper course for a man of God to consent to a stakeout in his own sanctuary. Holmes offered him no further assurance. He had already moved past the moment. "I shall require the vestry key," he said simply. "Of course, yes." Asbury reached into the folds of his robe and produced a brass key on a worn black ribbon. "And one more thing," Holmes added, pausing at the organ again. "When did Hartnell begin employment here?" 3 years ago. Arrived on All Souls' Day, I believe." Holmes's eyes flickered. "The 1st of November?" "Yes." It had rained that morning. He had no luggage to speak of, just a satchel of sheet music and a rain-soaked hat. Did he give references? None written, only the recommendation of the diocesan office. He played for them during a confirmation. They said he was exacting. Holmes drew a fingernail along the edge of the ivory keys. Exacting men often carry unfinished guilt. Asbury blinked. "I beg your pardon. Never mind. Watson, bring the lantern." We waited for dusk. I confess there was something unsettling about remaining inside that church, as the sun fell behind the yew trees, and the light filtered through the stained glass in fractured reds and purples. Holmes occupied the rear pew beneath the choir loft, motionless. I sat across the aisle, the lantern between us, dimmed to a soft glow. Asbury had returned to the vicarage, but not without protest. "It is not decent," he had said, "to lie in wait like constables in a trap." Holmes had given him no reply beyond a single look that brokered no argument. The air grew colder as evening deepened. The occasional rustle of ivy at the window, then silence. Hours passed. Holmes had not moved. Then, at precisely 10 minutes past 10, there was a sound. It began as a gentle creak. Holmes's hand lifted slightly. The front door. We heard the low metal sigh of the latch, followed by the soft hush of the door closing. Then footsteps. Deliberate, slow, unhurried. The steps crossed the nave and stopped near the altar rail. I strained to see past the edge of the pew, but saw only the faint outline of a figure tall, slender, wearing a hat. Holmes was already standing. "Stay," he whispered. and moved like smoke up the side aisle, his figure vanishing behind the column near the organ. The figure at the altar bent slightly. I heard the faint pull of rope fibres sliding through cloth. That's when Holmes spoke. "You forgot to bow this time, Mr. Hartnell." The figure froze. For a second I feared he might flee, but instead the man slowly straightened, turning his head slightly toward the voice. "I knew someone would come," he said. Hartnell, though years older now, had the same voice Asbury had described precisely, even like a hymn sung on pitch. Holmes emerged into the chancel light. "3 years of silence," said Holmes, "then you returned to finish a rite." "Why?" "Because the vow was never witnessed," Hartnell replied. "And a vow, unwitnessed, is not complete." "What vow?" Hartnell turned his gaze toward the stained glass window behind the altar. "He was meant to die here, on this rail, and I was to watch. That was the agreement. With whom?" Hartnell did not answer. Holmes took a step closer. "What did you interrupt, Mr. Hartnell?" "The rope. Watson brings it here." I retrieved it carefully from where Hartnell had laid it, coiled in the same precise manner as before. Holmes examined the knot. "Have you tried this often?" "Every night, for 6 weeks, until the day he vanished." "Who vanished?" Hartnell's voice was soft. "Edgar Pycroft. The name meant nothing to me." Holmes tilted his head. "That was the chorister, wasn't it?" "Yes, my pupil. He sang the responses for All Saints' service. November the 2nd, he made the vow. To die here that night. I was to bear witness. That's not a vow, that's a suicide pact." "No," said Hartnell, "a dedication. That was his word. He believed the church sanctified sacrifice." Holmes's voice cooled. "And what changed? He never arrived. The hour passed. I waited, then I ran. And now I return. Because I saw him." "Where?" "2 weeks ago, in the congregation, 3rd pew." He looked at me and mouthed the words. "What words?" "The vow is not done." There was a silence that reached from the pews to the rafters. "You believe he is alive?" I asked. "No," said Hartnell. "I believe he wants me to finish it." Holmes turned to me, then back to Hartnell. "You are not mad. You are convinced." Hartnell nodded once. "Then we must prove the vow was already fulfilled," Holmes said, and stepped past him to the altar. A sound echoed above some of the organ pipes, whistling faintly as if disturbed by a breeze. Only there was no breeze. Holmes looked up. "You buried the rope, didn't you?" "After that final night." "Yes." "Where?" Hartnell looked at the floor, beneath the south aisle pew, under the flagstone with the crack. Holmes moved swiftly, lantern in hand. He tapped each stone until the dull thud of hollow space responded. "Here!" With a crowbar fetched from the vestry, he lifted the slab. There, amid dust and fragments of bone, lay the original rope, still knotted, still stained. Holmes held it to the light. "Blood," he murmured. Hartnell stared, unable to speak. "Then your vow was witnessed," Holmes said. A soft creak from the loft interrupted us. Hartnell turned sharply. "He's here." Holmes raised a hand. "Stay quiet. He comes not for you, but for the truth." The sound from the loft came again, wood flexing under weight, the distant hush of shoe against dust. Holmes was already climbing the side stair, lantern held low, his shadow thrown tall against the wall of the apse. I followed close behind Hartnell, a silent figure below us, eyes fixed on the organ, as if half expecting it to play itself. The loft was empty, only the pews, the narrow choir bench, and the silent expanse of pipework facing the nave. Holmes moved swiftly, methodically. He touched nothing, yet surveyed every beam and corner with eyes that measured weight and motion. Then he stopped, gaze fixed on a wooden chair in the corner. A layer of dust covered it, but not uniformly. One armrest bore a smudge. "He's been sitting here," Holmes murmured. Hartnell's voice drifted up from below. "You see something?" "Only the absence of what should have remained undisturbed." Holmes turned toward the hymnals stacked beside the organ casing. He lifted one, then another, pausing at the third. The edge of its pages showed the faintest bulge, as though something had been pressed inside. He opened it. A folded scrap of parchment slid out onto his palm. "Watson, take this down." He handed it to me. The ink was pale, but the hand was unmistakably deliberate. "Psalm 116, I will walk before the Lord in the land of the living. Vow paid in silence. Return not to the voice of men." Holmes's eyes narrowed, a peculiar scripture to sight, not one of despair, one of resolution. Hartnell stood beneath us now, looking up. "I told you he was here." Holmes ignored him. "Psalm 116, he repeated quietly. "Not a call to die, but a statement of having not died." "Then it's a signature," I said. "A kind of proof?" Holmes's gaze turned inward. "Or a warning." He descended quickly, passing Hartnell without a word, and making direct for the altar rail. Kneeling again, he placed both ropes side by side, the coiled one left earlier, and the stained older relic from beneath the floor. "Notice anything?" he said softly. "The coil is tighter," I offered. "The knot is smaller. Precisely. The original was tied by someone desperate. The recent one by someone observant, controlled, replicating a symbol, not enacting it." Hartnell approached slowly, lips parting. "You mean he's alive, and he returned to show you that?" "But why now?" I asked. "After 3 years?" Holmes stood. "Because something else has been set in motion. The vow may be concluded, but not the act surrounding it." "A crime?" "No, something worse. A ritual sustained by secrecy." He turned to Hartnell. "When you saw him in the pew, did he leave anything behind?" Hartnell thought for a moment. "Nothing. He was gone before I even stood. Did anyone else see him?" The vicar was delivering the gospel. All eyes were forward. I alone looked left. "And no one remarked upon his presence afterward?" "No, they couldn't have. No one would have known him but me." Holmes turned away briefly, then faced the organist again. "Tell me about the boy." "Edgar, he was 15, quiet, devout, I suppose you'd say. Came from a family of stoneworkers used to carry the censer for evensong." "Did he speak of the vow often? Only once?" "It was the night of rehearsal. He waited behind after the others had gone and asked if we might hold the doors open after dark." "Why?" "He said the vow could only be fulfilled under stars." "And you agreed?" "No, I dismissed him. Told him the symbolism was unnecessary." Hartnell's voice faltered. "The next morning, he was gone." Holmes was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded once to himself and crossed again to the vestry. I followed, the lantern bobbing in my hand. He pulled open drawers, one after another, until he found what he was seeking. A large black psalter, its spine worn, pages stiff with age. "What are you looking for?" I asked. "Validation." He flipped quickly to Psalm 116, his eyes scanning the margins. Then he held the book up. "Look here." In the white space beside the verse were 2 faint pencil lines. At first glance they appeared idle marks, smudges of graphite from an inattentive thumb, but Holmes traced them carefully with his finger. "Not random," he said. 2 parallel slashes. "Do you know what this is, Watson? A tally, a grave mark, common among choir boys who passed their final confirmation. 1 line for life in service, 2 for release." I looked closer. The lines had been cut into the paper, not merely drawn. Holmes lowered the psalter. This was not a suicide, it was an exodus. But from what? Hartnell had entered behind us now, pale, trembling. Why would he fake a death? Because, Holmes said, someone required it of him. A moment passed, and then the sound came again low, mournful, reverberating from the organ pipes above, but this time the keys had not been touched. Holmes turned sharply. That pipe is opening on its own. He moved quickly into the loft again, I behind him. This time he went not to the bench, but behind the pipe facade, into the narrow crawl behind the instrument. There, lodged within the swell box, was a folded vestment, child-sized, dust-covered, a white surplice. Holmes drew it out and held it to the light. On its collar was a patch of dried wax. Red. A seal, I whispered. A private order, Holmes said, one that never intended the vow to be broken. Behind us, the pipe creaked once more. Holmes turned the surplice over in his hands with a slow, precise motion, his thumb brushing the edge of the wax as though measuring its intent. The red residue flaked slightly under his touch. A seal, yes, but not one of authority. Ecclesiastical wax does not stain linen like this. This is pigmented, dyed, symbolic, exactly. A theatrical reproduction of a sacrament. Someone staged a rite here not to fulfill scripture, but to suggest obedience while enabling flight. You believe the boy used this as a decoy? No, Watson. I believe someone prepared it for him, to allow his disappearance to seem sacred finally. Ritualized. He folded the vestment and handed it to me. Take this. Preserve the wax. We'll need its pigment traced. We may be dealing with a private confraternity, something hidden within the church itself. Hartnell had followed us part way up and now lingered near the stair, his hand gripping the balustrade. This is beyond me, he said faintly. I thought I was guilty of abandoning him, but now it feels as though we both were used. Holmes descended briskly and faced him. You were. The boy's vow was a narrative given to him, implanted and rehearsed, and you were his audience. He needed one. But why fake a death? Why disappear? Because
vows do not frighten the dead, Holmes said, but they do liberate the living if shaped correctly. I came down behind them, still carrying the folded cloth. The chill of the church had grown sharper, not from weather, but from knowledge. And the rope? I asked. Was that too part of the performance? Holmes hesitated. The first rope, yes, but the second, that was a signal. To you, to someone. It was meant to echo the original act, but inverted. It's not a threat, Watson, it's a summons. A summons for whom? Holmes's answer came not in words, but in a gesture. He turned, eyes lifting toward the narrow tower steps that led to the belfry above the nave. We followed without speaking. Each stair creaked with the weary voice of 100 Sundays. Dust coated the iron rail, and spiderwebs clung to the stone corners. As we reached the upper platform, a shaft of moonlight struck the bell's rim, casting a broken ring across the timber floor. Holmes went to the rope that hung beside it, testing its tension. Cut and re-knotted, he said. Recently. He lifted the frayed end. A second rope thinner, silken, was woven into the base, hidden unless one knew to check. Watson, do you recall the line from the note, "Return not to the voice of men"? Yes. Holmes turned the rope over and showed me the thread. It had been plaited into the bell rope in such a way that it could be pulled silently from below. A bell that moved but did not chime. A silenced call, Holmes said, not meant for ears, for eyes. You mean... He tugged the line gently. A faint shift of shadow from the bell's interior followed, revealing a hollow pocket carved along the inside. Holmes reached in. His hand emerged holding a tiny folded slip, no larger than a communion wafer. He opened it beneath the moonlight. There was no writing, only an emblem, 3 circles, intersecting, the ancient symbol of the triquetra intertwined loops, often used to represent eternity or the binding of vows. Holmes studied it without blinking. This was never about death. It was about passage. Hartnell, who had remained below, called softly from the foot of the tower. Mr. Holmes entered the church. We descended immediately. Holmes extinguished the lantern as we went. In the darkness, only the faint hum of air through the stained-glass gaps gave us orientation. We stepped into the nave just as a figure passed through the side aisle, cloaked, hurried, but not unaware. "He's seen us," I whispered. Holmes didn't answer. He moved left, vanishing between the pews. I remained still, heart beating in rhythm with the echo of the man's footsteps. Then a stumble, a sharp crack as wood struck stone. I turned and saw Holmes already upon him, not with violence, but precision, gripping the man's shoulder, pressing him against the stone column by the pulpit. He did not struggle. Instead, he lifted his hands slowly and dropped his hood. He was younger than I expected, no more than 20. His features were angular, ascetic, the face of one accustomed to silence. His eyes, however, were clear, watchful, almost relieved. Holmes stepped back, allowing him space. "You're not Edgar Pycroft," he said calmly. "No, but you know him?" The young man nodded. "Where is he? Gone? Dead?" "No." "Then where?" The man took a breath. He asked me to finish what he began, to watch the altar until the rope was returned. Holmes leaned in. "And did he leave a message?" The young man reached into his cloak and produced a narrow slip of vellum. Holmes took it and read silently. Then he looked at me. "Watson's challenged us." "To what?" "To see through the vow to its author." "And who might that be?" Holmes held the note out toward the lantern. The ink was pale but visible. "Not all altars are stone, not all ropes bind. Some loose the tether between name and deed." Before I could speak, a noise above the bell rope shifted. A whisper against the beam. The whisper passed through the rafters again, barely more than a thread of air shifting wood. The young man stiffened, but did not move, as though the sound confirmed something long expected. Holmes, however, had already turned his attention away from him. His eyes were fixed not on the bell rope, but on the wooden screen behind the pulpit, an ornate lattice of carved oak that separated the sanctuary from the chapel's smaller rear vestry. "That screen, Watson, when did you last examine it? Only in passing." Holmes stepped forward, lifting the lantern. The light played across the carving vines, thorns, lambs, and then caught something else, a smear, not fresh, but deliberate. "Wax," he said quietly. "Red, like on the surplice, pressed into the carving itself." He touched it, then examined his fingertips, still slightly tacky. That seal was made here, not above, and looked just beneath the lamb's flank, a hinge. The wood shifted with barely a protest. A narrow panel opened outward, revealing a cramped recess behind the pulpit, barely large enough for a man to kneel upright. Within it lay a blanket, a rusted cup, and beside it a torn page from a hymn book, folded into quarters. "Watson, bring it." I reached into the hollow and retrieved the paper. Holmes opened it slowly, revealing another passage marked not with ink, but with a scorched blackened edges carefully charred to draw the eye. "He shall not be known by name, but by absence. His psalm is silence." Another message, a code. Hidden in liturgical verses, it's a cipher of faith structured to evade suspicion under the guise of devotion. The young man stepped forward now, more composed than before. He didn't vanish, you understand? He was taken, but not forcibly, persuasively. By whom? By the man who taught him to listen for silence more than words. Holmes studied him. Not a priest, no, a visitor, came once a week, always sat in the back, spoke to Edgar after choir practice. I only saw him once, and even then I wasn't certain he was real. Describe him: tall, severe. Posture. Wore gloves even in summer. Never took communion. Holmes's expression shifted. A man who believes himself separate from sacrament, that's rare, or calculated. He turned to Hartnell, who had silently entered and now stood near the nave. "Did you know of anyone matching that description?" Hartnell shook his head. "Only there was a man who came for evensong but never joined the service. watched through the door, never entered. I thought him perhaps agnostic or grieving. Holmes's tone tightened. No, not grieving. Planning. That compartment was built for observance. Someone has been watching undetected for months, possibly longer. He turned again to the young man. What is your name? Thomas Reeve. And how long have you known of this hidden space? Since the second night I kept watching. I heard movement, saw the panel shift. He was gone before I reached it. Then you're not alone. No, I never was. Holmes paced now, moving in a deliberate arc around the pulpit, eyes flicking from floor to ceiling, pew to candle holder. We are dealing with someone who orchestrated a disappearance and a return, both hidden in plain sight, who left behind symbolic traces not to warn but to control the narrative. He wishes us to decode him. To what end? I asked. To understand his theology. This is not crime in the legal sense, it is liturgy distorted into ritual. He stopped. Watson, what was the phrasing from the first note? He will return to finish the vow. And from the parchment? Not all altars are stone, not all ropes bind. Holmes nodded. He's staging doctrine, a private scripture, layered beneath the known verses. That takes not just belief, it takes design. You think this man wrote the lines in the Psalter? I think he wrote all of them. And I believe we're no longer looking for Edgar Pycroft. We're looking for the author of his absence. A low groan echoed from the rear of the church. Hartnell spun round. That came from the crypt. Holmes was already moving, lantern high. The door to the crypt lay just behind the sacristy, an iron slab inset into the floor with a ring pull worn smooth by centuries of reverent hands. Holmes grasped it without hesitation and heaved it open. A gust of cold dampness rose like breath from an unspoken name. We descended. The stone steps curved downward into shadow. The air thickened, carrying the unmistakable scent of wax, stone, and mildew. At the base was a narrow corridor lined with recessed ancient burial niches, sealed by crumbling plaques. And there, seated cross-legged against the furthest wall, was a figure, motionless, head bowed, as though in prayer. Holmes approached slowly, each footfall swallowed by the heavy silence. The man did not raise his head. Then Holmes said, very gently, I presume this is the altar, not made of stone. The figure exhaled, a whisper. He left me his name. Holmes crouched beside him. Did you give him yours? The man lifted his head. Yes, but I took another in return. From behind us, the wind stirred the open crypt door. Holmes remained crouched before the man seated in the crypt, the two of them framed in half-light and shadow. Dust motes drifted between them, disturbed only by the whisper of the wind above. The figure was older than the young watcher, 50 perhaps, but lean, as though he'd lived more on contemplation than bread. His eyes were pale, unfocused, not from blindness, but from long inner scrutiny. "And what name did you take?" Holmes asked. The man smiled faintly. "The boys. You call yourself Edgar Pycroft?" "For now. Why?" "Because a name untethered from its bearer becomes a key." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "You're not speaking metaphorically." "No. He gave you his name voluntarily?" "He gave me his story, his absence, his role. I merely became what others expected him to become." "Then where is the real Pycroft? Gone? Not in body, he walked away." "But he left me what mattered. A role, a witness. To what? To the vow, to the silence it demanded, to the shape it left in others. You orchestrated the noose on the altar rail, yes, twice. The first, for his disappearance. The second, to call him back. So he is alive. More than most." Holmes stood, voice now harder. "And where is he?" The man tilted his head toward the floor. "Not far, but not here." Hartnell, who had joined us near the mouth of the stair, spoke for the first time. "Why do this? Why vanish into scripture and shadows? Why feed us riddles like communion? The man's gaze shifted to him. Because faith is not understood through argument but through repetition, symbol, ritual, echo. We believe what returns. And the rope? It was a gesture of return. Holmes turned, stepping slowly through the crypt, his eyes roving over the crumbling stones, the sealed chambers, the forgotten names. Then he paused. Watson, what do you see here that doesn't belong? I looked. Only dust, plaques, niches carved in the Norman style. That slab, Holmes pointed. It's been cleaned. Recently. Indeed, the others bore layers of soot and time. This one was brushed, the letters more visible. He knelt before it and read aloud. Laurentius Felbridge, Deacon, 1822-1873. Vow made, vow kept. Holmes exhaled softly. So it's not just the boy, it's a lineage. Do you believe that Felbridge is connected? More than that, he's the origin. He traced the inscription gently. Vow made, vow kept. Not a phrase found on Anglican headstones, but common in certain mystical orders, self-denying fraternities, monastic offshoots. Hartnell leaned forward. You mean a sect? Possibly an internal one, hidden in plain view. He turned back to the seated man. You were the final witness, weren't you? For Pycroft, as Felbridge once was for someone before him? Yes. And he returned to end it. No, he returned to begin something else. What? To witness me. Holmes stepped back. His expression was unreadable. You're passing the role forward. Yes. And that's why you came? Because the rope was never about fear. It was an invitation. The noose was not a threat, Doctor. It was a circle. A circle of what? Of silence? Of eyes? Of names given and unspoken? Then the real Pycroft is watching. Always. That is the nature of the vow. Holmes turned to me now, speaking quickly. We need to examine parish records. Hartnell, do you still keep the Book of Confirmations? Yes, in the sacristy safe. Go, fetch it. Hartnell disappeared up the stairs. Holmes faced the man again. How many names have passed through you? 12. And all gone? No, most still walk, but none bear their own name. That is the price. Watson, Holmes said with a sudden edge. Do you see it now? The names in the psalter, the double lines, they weren't deaths, they were transitions, identities passed on like vestments. A rustle above footsteps. Hartnell returned, breath tight. Here! He handed Holmes the book. Holmes flipped to the most recent confirmations. There, look. 1 week before Pycroft's disappearance, a boy named Thomas E. Roke was confirmed dead, but no such boy was ever recorded in the census. No baptismal entry, no family, a ghost in ink. He was the predecessor, Holmes muttered. And now, gone. His name, too, likely in the hands of another. The man in the crypt reached into his robe and withdrew a folded parchment. Holmes accepted it, unfolded it, and read. Then handed it to me. It bore only a list, 12 names, Pycroft's near the bottom. At the top is Laurentius Felbridge. At the very end, John H. Watson. My breath caught. Holmes's voice was calm. He expected us. My eyes met Holmes's, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The paper in my hand trembled, though whether from the chill of the crypt or the implication written at its base, I could not say. My name placed among those who had, one by one, surrendered identity to a vow neither legal nor sacred, but something quieter, more invasive. A spiritual exchange masquerading as anonymity. You see now, Holmes said softly, he didn't just expect us, he chose us. One reason, one for memory. I held the list tighter. I don't understand. Why me? Because you've borne witness before you write it down. You give shape to what vanishes in others. The man in the crypt smiled faintly. Names don't disappear, they are carried. Holmes crouched beside him again, tone colder now. But you're not just a witness, you're a recruiter. No, I am a listener. Holmes reached into his coat and withdrew the slip with the triquetra. This symbol, you used it on the note hidden in the bell. Yes, what does it mark? A threshold, a place where the name can be severed. A place, not a person. Correct. Holmes stood abruptly. Watson, the font. I followed as he ascended the crypt stairs, leaving the man seated in his votive silence. Hartnell remained at the top, clutching the confirmation register with both hands, as if it might absolve him, through proximity alone. The font stood near the entrance of the church, a circular basin of stone raised on a pillar, its lip worn smooth by generations of christenings. But it was not the bowl Holmes examined. It was the floor beneath. He moved the rug aside, a carved seal, set flush with the flagstone, faintly traced with red. The same wax, I said. Holmes knelt. This is not a symbolic placement, it's literal. This seal marks the place where the vow is enacted, not in death, but in transfer. He pressed the edge of his nail into the groove, and beneath it? Holmes looked at me, then back to Hartnell. Have you ever had reason to lift this stone? No, never. Help me. We pried at the edge, stone by stone, until the central slab shifted. Holmes eased it aside with care, revealing a shallow cavity no more than 12 inches deep. Inside lay another parchment. Holmes retrieved it, unrolling it slowly. It's a register, older than the one Hartnell holds. Ink faded, palm worn. He read aloud. The order of the silent vow, names known, names given, Laurentius Felbridge, 1822, Alistair Gray, 1847, Benedict Rowe, 1861. The list continued, until the most recent entry, Edgar Pycroft, Simon Hale. Witness J.H. Watson pending. My throat closed. Holmes did not look up. He's writing the continuation in advance. And that name, Simon Hale? The young man in the loft, Holmes said quietly. He wasn't there to finish the vow. He was waiting to become it. Hartnell stepped back, visibly shaken. You mean he's next? No, he was next. Pycroft already passed the vow to him. What remains is the witness. The act must be seen to be valid. The rope, the altar, the echo of the name, it all constructs the story required to make the vow real. Then why draw us here? Because this passage was flawed. Something interrupted it. The man in the crypt? Holmes nodded. He wasn't meant to keep the name. He was only the placeholder, but he clung to it. And now? Now Pycroft wants it back. Holmes turned sharply, his voice low. Come with me. We returned to the crypt. The man was gone. Only the folded paper with the triquetra remained, placed where he had sat. Holmes picked it up. He's reversed it. Look, I turned it over. The symbol now bore a cross through its center. Holmes's voice dropped. He's broken the cycle. Hartnell looked between us, pale. What does that mean? It means, Holmes said, someone else must carry the vow now. The organ above issued a low chord, unplayed, a tone held without touch. Holmes moved toward the nave with measured urgency, the fading chord from the organ still murmuring in the timbers above. It was not a melody, not a note shaped by hands, but a breath, a residual resonance, as though the instrument had exhaled its own memory. He's here, Holmes said, not looking at the loft, but at the space between pew and pulpit. Not the man who fled the Crippycroft. Alive. Alive enough to end what was interrupted. I kept close behind, the folded triquetra still in my palm. The paper felt warm. Holmes turned to Hartnell. Tell me precisely where you saw the boy that last time. The service where he was seated. Third pew, from the back, north side. He didn't move during the hymns. And afterward, gone, as though he'd never entered. Holmes nodded. He was never part of the congregation. He was the liturgy itself, inserted, performed, vanished. We approached the pew in question. Holmes ran his fingers along the wood, then beneath it. There, he whispered. A knot of twine, frayed. Loop, still intact. Another noose? No, a symbol, left for the next to find. He was leaving instructions. He turned to me suddenly. Watson Simon Hale. Where did he go after the bell tower? I searched my memory. He lingered near the altar, then vanished before we questioned the man in the crypt. Then we've been behind the page since the beginning. He's part of this composition. You think Pycroft intended Hale to carry it? He did, but something changed. Someone interfered, possibly that man below. Then who holds the vow now? Holmes didn't answer. Instead, he moved toward the vestry, throwing open the door and scanning the shelves with sharp precision. What are you looking for? The only instrument more precise than a bell rope. He stopped. This. He removed a small wooden box from a shelf and opened it to reveal a tuning fork well-worn brass, marked with 3 notches. Holmes struck it lightly against the edge of the table. The tone shimmered in the narrow space like a secret spoken between walls. Same pitch, he murmured. Same as the organ's false breath. Then someone has been using it to call the tone without playing, to summon memory without presence. Hartnell leaned forward, voice thin. But why? What purpose does a silent liturgy serve? Holmes looked at him steadily. Because this vow isn't about truth, it's about control. Control of what? Of identity, of absence, of guilt. It binds not just the name but the witness. That's why the list ends with Watson. I felt my breath catch again, involuntarily. So I was meant to see it, to affirm it. Your role is not passive. You are the ink that finalizes the rite. Without the witness, the vow is air. A sudden sound of a gentle thud interrupted him. From the loft. Holmes turned without hesitation and ascended once more. I followed. Heart now quickened not by fear, but by the rhythm of inevitability. At the top, seated before the organ bench, was a boy, or rather a man, thin enough to still pass as one. Simon Hale. He did not look up. His fingers rested gently on the keys, not pressing, only hovering. I waited, Holmes said quietly. I know, Simon replied, and he did not come. He came, but not to finish it. Then why? To watch me choose. And I did. What choice? To break the chain, you left the triquetra with the cross. Yes, because it ends here. That is not your decision alone. Simon looked up now, eyes not defiant, but resolved. He gave me the name, but I refused to carry his shadow. I won't vanish from his story. Holmes moved closer. Then who does? No answer came, only the sound of a soft, shifting pressure behind the panelled wall, a whisper beneath the wood. Holmes turned, voice low. It was never meant to be him. I stepped forward. Then who? Holmes looked at me. The list is still in my hand. It's always the one who watches. The bell rope trembled above. Holmes turned away from Simon Hale, his gaze drawn not to the trembling bell rope above us, but to the shadowed pulpit screen below. There was no sound now, only the soft creak of wood remembering motion, and the faint reverb still hanging in the organ pipes like breath, not yet exhaled. Simon's voice was calm, but it carried. I didn't ask for the name. No, Holmes replied, but you didn't return it either, would you have? Holmes offered no answer. I stepped forward, unable to keep silent. Then who was the vow meant for? Holmes turned to me, not unkindly. It was never truly about who bears the vow, Watson. It's about who records it. My voice cracked. You mean I was always the intended final line? The record is incomplete without a witness. Someone must carry memory, not transformation. Pycroft's disappearance only mattered because you would confirm it. He built his myth not in silence but in your future pages. Simon rose slowly from the bench, his palms still lifted from the keys, like a man afraid to disturb an instrument not entirely under his control. He said you'd understand. That Holmes always did, eventually. And you? I asked. I don't know. I was told only to remain until the bell moved without ringing. And now it has. Holmes stepped between us, tone clipped, but not cold. "Simon, you may leave." "What? The vow is broken." The seal was crossed out. "You are not beholden to an order that no longer carries its own authority. You are free. And the name? Keep it, return it, burn it. It no longer holds power." Simon stood a moment longer, then walked to the stairs, his footsteps echoing in irregular patterns down into the nave. Holmes and I remained in the loft. He lowered himself to the edge of the bench, resting one hand lightly on the edge of the keyboard. The rope trembled once more. "Not in fear," he murmured, "but in expectation." "What now?" "Now we find the final pen." "The pen? The one who designed the ritual but left its conclusion unwritten." "You think Pycroft is still nearby?" "Not nearby. Here." Holmes stood abruptly. "Come." We descended together the sanctuary below, hollow and half-lit by lanterns that had burned low. The crypt door stood open, the seal beside the font still lifted. But no figure awaited us this time. Only the sound of the wind passing once more through the bell tower's hollow. Hartnell emerged from the vestry, pale and alert. Where is he? Gone? Or hiding? I don't know. That boy, Simon, passed me and said nothing. Holmes moved past him, heading for the back of the chapel. He stopped before the pulpit screen once more. The panel we had opened earlier now closed again, flush with its carved surroundings. This place was designed for observation, not once, but many times over. He pressed at the edge. The panel opened, empty. He crouched, examining the floor where the cup and blanket had lain. Disturbed, recently, but not by him. "You think Pycroft returned?" Holmes didn't answer. He stood and crossed toward the organ again. At the base of the stool, something caught his eye. Watson light here. I knelt and held the lantern low. A folded paper, tucked beneath the leg of the bench. Holmes retrieved it, unfolded it. A single-line witness, not what was seen, but what was left unseen. Beneath it is a sketch, not of the rope, not the seal, but of a face. Mine. I froze. Holmes said nothing. He only turned the page toward me. Pycroft was never hiding from judgment. He was waiting for yours. But why? Because you complete him. You give the absence form. Without you, he's just a rumor. And with me, he becomes canon. From above, the bell trembled again, but this time it struck. One chime, low, final. Holmes whispered, "He's made his return." The bell's solitary chime hung in the air like a final note that refused to fade, vibrating through the stone and timber of the chapel, echoing through silence rather than across it. Holmes didn't move, nor did I. Even Hartnell behind us near the choir stalls had frozen, one hand still on the vestry door handle, knuckles white. "He's made his return," Holmes said again, but more quietly now, almost reverently. "To complete the vow?" "No, Watson, to resolve it." He began walking slowly, with a deliberation that suggested he was following a pattern already known to him, step by step along the nave's central aisle, as if the very stones recalled a path taken once before. I followed. We passed the font, the side pew where the rope had been hidden, the cracked floor tile where the seal had once been. And then we reached the altar rail. It was empty. Nothing lay upon it. No rope, no vestment, no parchment. But Holmes did not stop. He stepped around the rail and knelt at the edge of the chancel, laying one palm flat upon the worn wood. "Here, what is it? Look closely." I crouched beside him and followed his gaze. A faint outline, no wider than a child's wristband parallel to the edge. A shadow worn into the grey, not recently, but over time. Someone knelt here often. "Daily," Holmes murmured, "and not just to pray, to observe." "The pulpit?" He nodded. "Every ritual has a beginning and an end. This was his seat, his threshold, where he watched the vow unfold before ever taking part in it." Holmes stood suddenly and turned toward the apse. "He's not hiding. He's waiting." "Where?" "Not behind the scenes, Watson. In the centre. He's been in plain view, reintroduced, reimagined." My stomach tightened. "You mean someone we've already seen?" "Precisely. Not as Pycroft, but as his echo." Hartnell had joined us now, expression caught somewhere between dread and dawning recognition. Then who? If Simon Hale was the intended vessel, who received the vow when it failed? Holmes looked not at us, but upward, to the choir. We ascended again. The loft was dark, the lantern's beam barely illuminating the space ahead of us. But as Holmes passed the organ, he paused. There, on the bench, a second folded paper. I lifted it, unfolded it with care. A single sentence in the same hand as before. "The witness must speak for the silent, otherwise the silence wins." Beneath it, no name, only a mark. 3 concentric rings, scratched hastily in ink. "He's challenging you," Holmes said softly. "Me? You hold the narrative. You authenticate the tale. Without your testimony, his legend never completes its circuit. Pycroft needs you not to find him, but to declare him." I felt cold, and if I refuse? Then he lingers, untethered, waiting for the next name to offer a witness. And if no name comes, he returns again, to repeat the cycle, to escalate it. Holmes turned, scanning the loft. He's reenacted every moment except one. Which? The vow's inception. He stepped behind the organ casing once more, then tapped the swell box in the hidden compartment where the surplice had first been found. Empty, but behind it, he found a slim recess. Holmes reached in and removed something, a ring. It bore no crest, no initials, only a groove on the inside as if once fitted over another object. Holmes turned it in the lantern light. "A placeholder," he murmured. "For what?" Holmes looked up slowly. A finger. The air thickened. "You don't mean no blood, no violence? Not amputation, Watson, abstention, a vow of removal." He gave up the thing that bound him legally to his identity, his seal, his signet, his family mark. So the ring was Pycroft's, yes. And by leaving it here, he confirmed it. Then he returned. Holmes nodded. "And the final act must be yours. What should I do? You write it." A sudden knock echoed from below, 2 soft raps on the chapel's heavy doors. Not the wind, not an accident, a summons. Holmes's voice dropped. "He's come to be seen." Holmes did not hesitate. He descended the loft steps swiftly, each footfall a measured response to the double knock that still echoed faintly through the chapel's wooden ribs. I followed at pace, heart thudding not with fear, but with the weight of culmination. We passed through the aisle again, the lantern casting elongated shadows that bent around the pews like silent congregants. At the great wooden door, Holmes paused only briefly before unbolting the lock. The hinges creaked wide, and there he stood. He had changed, yes, but not so much as to be unrecognizable. The cheekbones were sharper, the hair longer, the posture no longer that of a boy, but of a man shaped by absence. His eyes grey, deliberatement mine, as if to ask permission for what came next. "Edgar Pycroft," Holmes said, voice even. Pycroft inclined his head. "Is that name still mine?" "It is, if you claim it, and if I refuse, then it passes to memory or to myth." Pycroft stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a soft, final thud. No wind followed. He looked around slowly, taking in the rail, the altar, the font, the shadowed pulpit. "All unchanged," he said. "Not quite," Holmes replied. "The ritual has completed its course." Pycroft looked at me now. "You've seen it all?" I nodded. "I've witnessed it." "And you will write it?" "Yes." "Then it's done." He reached into his coat and withdrew something small, an envelope, sealed with red wax, unmarked. "This belongs beneath the font. It is not a message. It is a silence, folded." Holmes took it carefully. "And the others?" They remain where they chose to vanish. I return not to collect them, but to end my place among them. You mean to abandon the order? There was never an order, Pycroft said softly. Only the echo of one man's grief. Felbridge. He began it. Not for power, for penance. The vow was never sacred. It was a rehearsal for his guilt, and we, all of us after him, played roles in his unfinished drama. You were the first to see it clearly. No, I was the first to walk away. But then why return? Because the echo was still sounding, because the vow needed a conclusion, and I wanted it to be written with clarity, not fear. Pycroft turned toward me again. That's why you were chosen. You see clearly, even when afraid. Holmes spoke now, quieter. The bell, the rope, the altar, they were all performances, symbols, but the only thing real was the witness. Without Watson, it all remains ritual, without resolution. Pycroft nodded, which is why I must speak now. He moved to the altar rail, knelt, and placed his palm where the faint imprint had long been worn into the wood. I took the name because I was given it. I passed it on because I could no longer bear it. But I take back only what is mine, not the silence of others. He stood again. I return, not to continue, but to close. A long moment passed. Holmes held the envelope lightly, as if it might vanish with a breath. And what becomes of the vow now? It ends. Pycroft turned to go, then paused. But silence never ends, does it? It only waits. Holmes did not reply, nor did I. Pycroft opened the door. The bell gave one soft hum above us, though, in acknowledgment, and he stepped out into the night. We stood there in the stillness of the nave. No words, no motion. Then Holmes looked at me. "Will you write it?" "Yes." "As for the truth?" "As a memory." The seal in Holmes's hand cracked slightly in the warmth of the lantern light. He slipped the envelope into the hollow beneath the font, then replaced the stone. "There. Let it rest." From above, the organ released a final breath of air, soft as lace. Holmes remained crouched beside the font for a moment. Longer, his fingertips resting on the edge of the sealed stone, as though listening for some final confirmation that the past had been laid to rest. But there was no sound, only the soft hush of stone against stone, the hush of breath, not held, but surrendered. "It's finished," I said quietly. He didn't move. "Not yet." "No, Watson, merely concluded. Is there a difference?" He stood now, brushing the dust from his coat sleeve. A ritual ends when those within it choose to release its shape. But something like this, rooted not in doctrine, but in lost leaves residue. Pycroft returned not for absolution, but for authorship, to ensure he would be named, not merely whispered. So it wasn't guilt? Holmes's expression softened, not quite to pity. No, it was authorship. You and I know well what it means to be reduced to a line, a gesture, a rumour in someone else's ledger. Pycroft reclaimed his own story. And what becomes of Simon Hale? He'll live freely now, I suspect. The cycle was never meant for him. But he saw it through. Sometimes bearing witness to the breaking of a thing is just as sacred as continuing it. We passed the pew where Simon had once sat in silence, now as unremarkable as any other. The twilight that had once curled along the stained glass had given way to early light, the reluctant shimmer of dawn just touching the far windows. Hartnell stood near the back, arms folded, the confirmation register closed and pressed tight to his chest. "You saw him leave?" Holmes asked. "Yes." He walked the path along the linden trees, didn't look back. Then it's done. Hartnell looked down at the book in his arms. There's no space for Pycroft's name, not in the register. It ended with the last confirmation. "That's all right," I said. "His name doesn't need to be written there." "It already is," Holmes added, and nodded toward me. "In the record that will reach farther than any registry." Hartnell blinked. I suppose I always knew something here wasn't quite right. Not wicked, just unfinished. You've now seen it finished. He hesitated. And what am I to tell the bishop? That a ghost returned to remove himself from a congregation? Tell him a man came back to retrieve his silence, Holmes said. If the bishop cannot understand that, he's in the wrong business. Holmes moved toward the exit then, pausing only once to glance back at the altar rail. The imprint was still there. He tapped it with his cane. What do you see? A faint groove, nothing more, exactly. That's all that remains of most things that mattered. A mark you can't read unless you already know what it means. We stepped outside into the light. The path was quiet. Mist hung low across the grass, and the bell tower behind us loomed without menace now, only as stone. I walked beside him, quiet at first, until Holmes broke the stillness. Do you feel it? What? The absence. Yes, but not with sorrow, nor should you. The vow, Watson, for all its trappings, was never a burden. It was a way of naming grief. And Pycroft? He finally learned how to speak without being present. We reached the lane where our hired carriage waited. Holmes paused beside it, drawing in a long breath of morning air. One last thing, I said, as I opened the door. Yes? Why me? Why is my name at the bottom of that list? He didn't hesitate, because only you could carry the silence forward without letting it become shadow. You write what cannot be spoken. You made him real. I stepped into the carriage, heart quiet now, no longer heavy. As Holmes climbed in beside me, the organ released one final breath of sound from within the chapel, though no hand touched it. Holmes smiled faintly. That was not farewell, that was acknowledgment. We rode away in silence,